Hello and welcome to GCSE Infection and Response with Mrs Castanera. We are on lesson 4, what is a communicable disease and how are pathogens transmitted? Lesson 4, communicable diseases. So today we are looking at diseases that can be communicable, as in pass from one person to the other. Our keywords are communicable, pathogen transmission and vector. So what I would like you to do is, first of all, I'd like you to have a go at the knowledge check. There are 8 questions, please. Pause the video whilst you do that. Okay, let's review those questions. Question 1, identify the meaning of cancer. So cancer is uncontrollable replication of cells to form tumours. Question 2, state what a benign tumour is. A benign tumour is a tumour that does not spread. Question 3, state what a malignant tumour is. So a malignant tumour is a tumour that can spread throughout the body. Make sure that you're marking these as we go along. So tick if you've got it correct, put a cross if you haven't done it or you've got it wrong, and write in the corrections as we go. Question 4, define the term risk factor. So a risk factor is something that increases the chances of getting a disease. Question 5. Identify 2 risk factors for cancer. Now there are many risk factors for cancer, but 2 of the most common are alcohol and smoking. Actually, there's another very common one, which is poor diet. So high fat diet or a diet high in carcinogens, which are cancer causing chemicals. There are lots of other factors, risk factors for cancer. We listed them previously. Feel free to go back and check against that list if you have something not on this one. Question 6, state a treatment for cancer. So there are 3 potential treatments. The number 1 is chemotherapy. There can also be another type of treatment called radiation treatment. There's also palliative care, though it isn't a treatment that will cure or in any way improve the cancer. It will just improve the quality of life for the person with the cancer. Question 7, identify where coronary arteries are found, so around the heart muscles. Question 8, state what CHD stands for. That would be coronary heart disease. Okay, so make sure you've ticked to show that you've got the questions right and corrected to show where you haven't. Give yourself a mark out of 8. And if you've got 4 or less, you need to review the previous lessons and learn some of these questions because we've had many of these several times. If you've done 5 or more, well done. So today we are going to learn about, we're going to need to know by the end of this lesson what a pathogen is and the effects that it can have. We're also going to know what communicable means and how these pathogens can be transmitted. So, communicable. Communicable diseases, which is from the old French disease, which is a lack of ease or a discomfort, are the ones that can be transmitted, that is, spread from person to person or animal to person. So the idea is that they're contagious, they can be passed on. We can sometimes call them infectious, okay, or contagious. So communicable diseases are caused by microscopic organisms, which we often call, or usually call, pathogens. So pathogens are microscopic organisms that cause disease. Okay, so on your student notes page, you would like you to make some notes on the main ways in which diseases can be transmitted and the manner of ways in which their spread can be stopped. So how can diseases be transmitted and how can they be stopped from being transmitted? I'd like you to follow this link on to YouTube to watch this video and to make those notes in your notebook, or on the student notes page, please. So pause the video whilst you do that. I recommend opening a secondary tab on your laptop if at all possible. Okay, welcome back. So, hopefully you've watched that video, made some notes, and we'll review those as we go through this lesson. So pathogens, as we've already discussed, pathogens are disease-causing microorganisms. So some microbes cause disease in humans, plants and animals. Others are essential for a healthy life. So for example, you may have seen adverts on TV talking about the good bacteria, such as in yogurts like Yakult, where they give you probiotics, which are good bacteria that help us, usually in our guts. They can help us degrade the food that we eat and help make the nutrients in that food available to us, as well as neutralising toxins that might be found in food. So we're going to put a little note about that. Okay, and so we couldn't exist without these bacteria. We are in fact outnumbered massively on this planet by bacteria, and every person has a huge variety, millions of bacteria inside their body, the majority of which are helping them all the time. And we call this our microbiome. Okay, so the ones that cause disease are called pathogens, but the rest of them are just called microbes or microscopic organisms. So a pathogen is disease causing. So essentially, if it's a pathogen, it's bad, and any of the other names, it's generally good. So both plants and animals can be infected by pathogens, and there are a number of different types of pathogens. Okay, and these include bacteria, which you know about, viruses, which I'm sure you know about by now, especially given that coronavirus is a virus itself, fungi, which is a fungus, such as athlete's foot, and protists, which we're not going to worry about for now. We're going to look at all of these later on. So for a pathogen to cause disease, it has to enter the body. This is really important. So these organisms, they can't cause diseases unless they're inside us, okay? Or it has to be transmitted or spread. So essentially it has to get into our body somehow. And there are many different ways of this happening. So let's have a look at that. Transmission. So disease is spread in 8 different ways, so 8 different categories of spread. So the first one is through water. So we might drink it, or we might bathe in it. So for example, cholera. And essentially, people are drinking the same water that they're bathing in, the same water that they're washing their clothes in, the same water that they're using for a toilet. Quite often this would be a riverbed, or a river, and or a stream. And so the local animals are going there as well, and it's very contaminated. So cholera is a very good example of a bacteria, that is spread by contaminated water. Now, in your video, you may have discovered that you can prevent what we call waterborne diseases, so diseases that are transmitted by water, by cleaning or sterilising the water. Okay, so water can be sterilised, and there's a number of ways of doing this. Okay, so you can sterilise it via UV light. So there is some ultraviolet light, also known as radiation. So there's some in the sun, but not enough ultraviolet light comes from the sun to clean and kill the bacteria in water. So you have to go through a very particular kind of ultraviolet treatment. Or you can use ozone, or you can use chlorine. And so for people travelling abroad to different countries where the water is potentially going to be infected with cholera, people often take purification tablets with them, and those tablets will have usually chlorine in them, and they will kill the bacteria in the water. You can also these days filter your water, so that's another option. And so there are very, very fine filters these days that you can buy, and you can drink the water that's passed through that, because bacteria cannot pass through it. So filtration is also an option, but it's such a fine filter that they use. So those filters are actually quite expensive. So there's one, for example, in the travel industry called Life Straw, but each of these straws, which can be used for a longer period of time, it's not just one-time use, but they cost about £20–25 per straw, and they do have a limited number of uses on them. So it might be 50 uses or 100 uses. So it's quite expensive, but very effective. So a second method of transmission is food. So if you've ever had or thought you've had food poisoning, that would be an example of this transmission. So ingesting, that means eating or drinking or consuming really, food covered in, for example, E. coli, which is a bacteria causing food poisoning. There's also salmonella. There's a number of other various options in the food poisoning categories of bacteria that can really cause you some harm. So E. coli causes food poisoning. And so for food, the main treatment we have for this is actually cooking. So if we cook our food, that will clean it. And I'll put this over here. So cooking food can prevent this. You can also wash it in a light bleach solution. So again, using chlorine. So cooking or washing in chlorine will help reduce the risk of this. Number 3. So this one is air transmission. So anything that is carried along by the air and inhaled. So the flu and the common cold are both a virus, and if they are in the air, usually because someone has coughed or sneezed and released the virus back into the air, then it's then inhaled by yourself, and then you would get this illness. So again, another way of preventing this is through the use of face masks. The main use for this, though, for the face mask, the person who is ill is the one who should be wearing the face mask, because that way when they cough and sneeze, they're not releasing droplets, aerosol droplets of virus in fact, into the air. So we don't want those pathogens released into the air in the first place. So if the person who is ill is wearing the face mask, it prevents them transmitting their disease to other people. So the next one is through direct contact. So everything we've looked at so far has been indirect contact. And in fact, I'm going to put a little thing about that. So these are all indirect. And there'll be others that are indirect. So direct contact is when you touch a surface or you touch something with that has the infection. So touching the actual bacteria or virus or whatever the pathogen is yourself. So you get that pathogen on your body by directly doing something like touching it or touching a person. So that is direct contact. Now, indirect contact is it's not really something you touched. Okay, so it's coming into your body and through another method. So not really via the skin, but through water, food, air, bites, that sort of thing. So direct contact is touching a surface that someone with an infection has touched. For example, athlete's foot, verrucas is another one, and warts. And cold sores as well. Okay, so that surface might be the other person, or the surface might be a swimming pool in the example of verrucas. So there's lots of different examples. So for this, to prevent direct contact through surfaces, the main prevention technique is cleaning, a lot of cleaning. You can wear gloves as a secondary option, but really cleaning is the number one goal, and you want to be cleaning with antimicrobial stuff. So bleach is generally the most effective, but there are other options. So you want things that are going to just destroy the viruses and bacteria in that. So option 5 is through animals. So there's lots of ways of getting an infection from an animal. It could be that they lick you and you have a cut in your skin, for example. So a lot of animals have a lot of bacteria in their mouths. You could have been bitten by an animal. For example, rabies is an example of disease that's passed on through animal bites. And so for this one, the main prevention technique is care with animals and just avoiding animals you don't know or trust. Okay, so number 6 is vector transmission. So vector transmission is a bit interesting. Essentially, it's a way of passing an illness from one animal or person with a disease onto a secondary animal or person via a third entity. For example, a mosquito may come along and bite an animal or a person with malaria. Okay, so then the mosquito is carrying the malaria inside its body, and then it flies around for a bit, and eventually it lands on somebody else or another animal. And when a mosquito takes a bite, it first injects some numbing stuff of its own into your body, and that contains the malaria disease. So that's how transmission is done through a vector. The mosquito is the vector, and it takes the disease from one organism, so one animal or human, to another one. Okay, so for this one, the prevention depends on the vector. So the main prevention for this, oddly enough, is education. So people need to understand how this type of disease is transmitted. So in the case of mosquitoes and malaria, you would wanting to cover up. You would want to use nets, mosquito nets over your bed at night when you're sleeping, and you would want to have plenty of anti-mosquito stuff on. Okay, so number 7, blood. So there's a couple of different ways that you can get a disease through blood contact. So first of all, you have to have a method of the blood going from one organism to another. So it might be through an infected blood transfusion, which would mean that blood was taken from someone who had a disease, and then it was given to someone else who didn't have the disease so that they caught it. Now, this doesn't happen these days very much, certainly not in our country, because we have a blood service who screen all the blood. Every bit of blood that is taken from a blood donor is tested very rigorously and thoroughly for a huge range of diseases that could be passed on in blood. And then if there's any contaminated blood, that blood is destroyed and removed and never ever put anywhere near another human. So to prevent this one, you need to use careful screening. of blood donations, so that you can remove anything that is contaminated. Another method of transferring a disease through blood is between the mother and the baby in the uterus. So when a baby is in the mother's womb, bacteria, viruses, infections, etc. can pass between the mother and the baby across the barrier of the placenta. So there's very little that can be done to prevent a baby catching or getting a disease from the mother. So this can be very tricky to deal with. So a last method is through sexual contact. So you're probably aware that there's a variety of diseases known as sexually transmitted diseases. And essentially any contact with bodily fluids can spread these diseases, such as gonorrhea. Okay, and there are a number of bodily fluids involved in sexual contact, which is how the disease is spread. So we use the term bodily fluids. Okay, and it spreads diseases such as gonorrhea. There are a number of others. There's syphilis, HIV, several others. So for this one, it's using the best method of prevention is using barrier contraceptives. So barrier contraceptives prevent these bodily fluids from mixing, and a barrier contraceptive is a condom, also a femidom, but they're not very, they're very similar. So barrier contraceptives such as condoms. Okay, so we are going to watch this video now. So I'd like to pause this video whilst you go watch the video, and whilst you're doing that, you need to write the definitions of the keywords from this video, okay, into the box on the next page. So here is the table on the next page. So you need to fill this in with the definition and an example, please. So you'll need to open up another tab or go on to the other video. Make sure you're writing all of those down with their examples. Once you've done that, please come back to this video. Okay, so we're going to move on to the checkpoint activity. Okay, so some raw meat products contain pathogens. Okay, we know about this. So this would be a food method of transmission. Suggest and explain 2 ways in which a restaurant could minimise the risk of infection to its customers. So you need to tell us what they are by suggesting them and explain why it would work. 2 ways to minimise the risk of infection to the customers. Okay, so there are 4 marks here. So they are asking you to do for 2 different methods, and for those 2 methods they're asking for a suggestion and explanation. So that is your 4 marks. So 2 marks for the suggestions, 2 marks for the explanations. Okay, so how are they going to minimise that risk to their customers? Please pause the video whilst you attempt this question. Okay, so let's go through that. So you can have any 4 from storing at low temperatures or freezing, reducing or preventing the growth of pathogens, cooking the meat products thoroughly. The reasons are such as to kill any pathogens present, so all 3 of those should do that, or maintain good hygiene, such as washing hands after handling the meat, or to prevent contaminating other food products. So any 4 of those, each one is worth 1 mark. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is I'd like to move on to the knowledge and application check. So if you could pause the video whilst you work through those questions and the questions on the next page, because this carries on. Okay, so questions 1 to 11, please. Okay, so pause the video whilst you do that. Okay, let's go through that then, please. So, make sure you are using a different colour pen to mark your work, and tick if you got it right, cross if you got it wrong or didn't write an answer, and make sure you write corrections in or answers for those that you weren't able to do. So state what a microbe is. A microbe is a microorganism. So this is a short name for microorganism. It can be all one word or it can just be with a hyphen, doesn't matter which way. Number 2, define the term vector. So a vector is an organism that transfers pathogens between other organisms. Question 3, identify the 4 main pathogen types. Okay, so if this wasn't clear already, it is virus, bacteria, protist, and fungi. Question 4, define the term transmission. So transmission is the spread of disease between organisms. Question 5, define the term pathogen. So pathogen is a disease-causing microorganism. Question 6, define the term health. So health is a state of physical and mental well-being. Okay, moving on to the next page. Question 7, define the term risk factor. So a risk factor is something that increases the chances of getting a disease. Question 8, state 2 risk factors for CHD. Sorry about the spelling error there. 2 risk factors for CHD. So you can have any one from obesity, alcohol, and smoking. Question 9, how can water be prevented from containing pathogens? So you can chemically sterilise and treat it, such as using chlorine, ozone, or UV radiation, or alternately you can filter it. Okay, and when you say filter, it needs to be through very fine, e.g. life straw. It's recommended that the answer you give instead would be that you chemically treat it. Okay. Question 10. The rabies virus is the type of species of the Lyssavirus genus in the family Rhabdoviridae. Suggest how this virus might be spread between animals and then between animal and a human. So first of all, it will be spread between animals, okay, via direct and sexual transmission. Then, through animal bites and direct contact between animals and humans. Okay, question 11. Why do hospitals put a quarantine procedure in place when there is an outbreak of norovirus? So the reason for this is to help control the spread of what is a very highly infectious disease. Okay, so there are 12 marks here. Okay, so one for every answer, but question 10 had two parts to it, so part 1 and part 2. So give yourself a mark out of 12 here. So if you got 6 or less, then you need to have another look at this, because a lot of those questions are things we have already done. If you got more than 10, you are doing amazingly, exceptionally well done. If you literally got 7 to 10, you're doing wonderfully, well done. Okay, so the final extension activity is to read the New Scientist article on how a researcher died from the pathogens that he was working with. It's quite an interesting one. It's a New Scientist article, so it can be a little tricky, but it is very interesting. And it just goes to show you how dangerous it is working with pathogens. So once you've done that, we are all done. Thank you very much.